Welcome to Eurodollar University with Jeff Snider, the head of global research for Alhambra Partners. And my name is Emil Kalinowski. And today, Jeff, you are going to call it. What are you going to call? What are you going to make official?
Well, I've always kind of admired and we've been jealous of the National Bureau of Economic Research, which isn't really a national bureau so much as a private trade association, but commonly known as the NBER. This is a group of economists, academic economists, who get together and for reasons that aren't really very clear, other than the fact nobody else did it, they get to decide what is and is not a recession, when a recession begins and when it ends and when we're into recovery. I always thought, man, that would be a cool job, wouldn't it? Having that authority, that sort of ability to say the economy is in recession. So because I'm jealous of the NBER, I convened the what we're loosely calling the Monetary Cycle Dating Committee to sort of date not our own equivalent of cycles in the global economy, which are these Eurodollar cycles, which we denote by these numbers: Eurodollar number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And given all the data, especially recent data, the Monetary Cycle Dating Committee has decided that, yes, we are indeed within Eurodollar number 5 as we currently speak. So taking a page out of the NBER's playbook, who always dates a recession about a year after it happens, we're going to date Eurodollar number 5 to last May.
The NBER may be a idiosyncratic American institution. I know when I was researching recessions in other countries, I had a very difficult time in determining whether or not it was a recession. I remember the early 1990s in France, for example. I wanted to know, was there a recession at that point? And as far as I could tell, there was no official committee in France or many other countries. So, all right, well, thank you very much, NBER. Jeff, this is Eurodollar number 5. Very quickly, what and when were 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Well, going back in time, number 1, I think most people remember, what's more commonly known as the global financial crisis or great financial crisis, the 2008 crisis, which people still today mistakenly believe was about subprime mortgages, when in fact it was, in our own vernacular, Eurodollar number 1. Number 1 simply meaning the first eruption of global dollar shortage in the Eurodollar system for various reasons that went beyond, like, for example, 1997 and 98, which was the Asian financial crisis, which is more of a limited regional dollar shortage. So Eurodollar number 1 begun really in August 7th of 2007, or August 9th, 2007, excuse me. That was Eurodollar number 1, the first eruption of a global dollar shortage. The second one, near and dear to your heart, Emil, was the quote unquote European sovereign debt crisis, which, like subprime mortgages in the US before, played a central role in creating that crisis, but it wasn't really about, Portuguese and Irish sovereign debt so much as it was how those things had a further impact across the entire global monetary system. So Eurodollar number 2 began sometime in 2011 and lasted through to 2012, created a recession outright in Europe, caused the Chinese economy to suffer its long-run decline that it's currently trying to deal with. The U.S. very nearly fell into recession by early 2013. So that was Eurodollar number 2. Fast forward a couple more years to 2014, 2015, and Eurodollar number 3. Again, same sort of symptoms. We talked about collateral days before, falling bond yields, flattening curves, all the financial indications, all the telltale signs of a Eurodollar cycle, the wrong end of the Eurodollar cycle in 2014 and 2015. Again, Chinese economy, emerging markets fell into absolute outright depression. The United States suffered what was nearly a recession again by 2016, while Europe largely stayed free from the economic consequences, but did suffer some of the financial problems too. Fast forward again, another cycle, we get 2017, globally synchronized growth, inflation, everything's great. But right away in 2018, all sorts of the same, now very familiar Eurodollar telltale signs of the global dollar shortage, number 4, especially in April and May of 2018. We got the dollar starting to rise. We got collateral problems again, flattening curves, all the same familiar stuff. So Eurodollar number 4, the fourth global eruption of dollar shortage, as well as the economic consequences from it, beginning in 2018. We don't really know how that would have worked out because by the end of 2019, there was very likely recession in the US, very likely recession. In fact, there was recession in Europe, a mild one in Europe. Japan had suffered almost two of them by that point, but we don't know ultimately how it would have worked out because along comes COVID and everybody forgets about Eurodollar number four as it got swept up into the pandemic. So Eurodollar number five is 2021 2022's version of the same repeating processes where we see the same exact types of financial and economic indications, which are, again, flattening curves, collateral indications, shortages, rising dollar, as we're going to talk about here, all of those things pointing in the direction of a fifth globalized, generalized outbreak of monetary disease, not pandemic, but monetary disease in the global system.
When you began listing all of those, you called it at first a global dollar shortage. But of course, that's shorthand dollar shortage. What we're referring to is what you just said at the end, a monetary disease, a lack of credit, a lack of collateral, a lack of tools, economic tools that we call money to encourage transactions, economic activity. Now, the NBER has four measures that they look at each time to determine whether or not there's a recession. One of them we recently discussed, if I remember correctly, real personal income. Now, we also have several measures. You've mentioned some of them right now while you were listing those previous eruptions of credit shortage. And the one we're going to discuss, at least top of mind, is the dollar, the US dollar. That, I think, is the one that may have convinced you to call it. And I've pulled up my little handy financial website here that identifies what is happening in currency markets. And Jeff, sometimes they put the dollar first and then the other currency. And then other times they put the other currency like the euro and then the US dollar second, and how they measure these things. But it's so handy this time. All the currencies that have the foreign currency first, they're all red arrows. They're all losing value. And all the currencies that said US dollar versus the Brazilian real or the ruble or whatnot, all green. I have never seen a clean sweep across every currency. I'm sure there's one where that's not the case at this particular moment. It is. So, Jeff, everyone's talking about it. The yen has been canceled. The euro has been abandoned. There's a financial apocalypse happening out there. Not really, but it's quite striking how when you look at the DXY, perhaps the most famous used measure of the US dollar. Everyone's talking about it straight up, everything else going down strongly. What's happening?
Yeah, and I think that was part of the problem that we had dating this as Eurodollar number five. Yeah, the US dollar's exchange value is not a one-to-one thing. It's not a definitive measure of what's going on, but it's a very powerful indication that, hey, as you just pointed out, if everything is moving in one direction, you need to pay attention to that. And so up until just recently, going back to, again, our collateral days earlier in the year, there was more of a variety amongst even the US dollar exchange value. For example, some of the commodity currencies like the Australian dollar kind of held in there. The Brazilian real just recently moved to a multi-year high. So it wasn't as if the US dollar was wrecking everybody. And the dollar index that most people pay attention to, DXY, as we've talked about many times, that's a heavy proportion to the euro, which sometimes that's misleading, sometimes it's not. So DXY is an indication, but you have to look beyond, look underneath the hood too. The Japanese yen is a pretty important one that we talked about yesterday on our Twitter Spaces, and I did a chart showing how the Japanese yen almost matches perfectly repo fails, believe it or not, which longtime fans of our show will obviously believe it pretty easily, having seen the basis behind it. But the overall point is that over the last couple of months, ever since things really started to break around that seasonal low point in March, it's become far more unified. US dollar exchange value going higher against almost every currency, including some of the more important ones, which is sort of a very compelling reason to say, yes, this must be Eurodollar number five. We've got all the other stuff that we've been talking about, for months. But here we have the US dollar's exchange value going higher when, by all accounts, including those arguing for some Bretton Woods 3 arrangement, it should be sinking, it should be collapsing. So what we have dollar uniformly rising when it should be doing the opposite. Again, compelling argument, justification for Eurodollar number 5.
Your article is at the Alhambra Investments website. It was posted on the 22nd of April, 2022, and the title is I'm officially calling it Eurodollar number 5. And there are charts here, Jeff. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 charts. Most of them currencies, the Australian, New Zealand dollar, the Dixie, the euro, the Indian rupee. And in case I had difficulty missing it, there's a big red arrow on pretty much every one of these graphs, and there's a month. And it's poetic, isn't it, Jeff, that Eurodollar number 5, the 5th month being May, you keep pointing to May on each of these charts, Jeff.
Yeah, and it's weird
Why?
because we've been pointing to May ever since last summer, really, because you could see it in economic data, you could see it in financial markets, and now you can see it in the US dollar's exchange value against a bunch of different currencies. Something changed around May where markets became more pessimistic, or in pure technical monetary sense, global dollars started to become much, much, much harder to source, much harder to roll over. Collateral became far more scarce for several reasons, risk aversion. So everything seems to be pointing back to last May. And given how everything has progressed since May, we can definitively say that it wasn't a flash in the pan. It wasn't a short run fluctuation. It seems to have escalated beyond all our own thresholds as well as any common sense thresholds. I mean, yield curves inverted, Eurodollar futures inverted, any number of all these other things, which say, yes, something happened in May and it's still going on to this point where it's gotten to be very serious. Therefore, Eurodollar number 5.
Was there any singular event that caught your attention? Because the dates here, depending on the currency or the yield curve, I've got May 28th, May 12th, May 11th, May 28th, May 20th, May 26th, May 25th. Was there a singular event or no, just a general inflection over the course of a couple of weeks?
Yeah, and I think it's more a general inflection over a couple of months, because we have to go back to these things are always processes. The flip from reflation into this Eurodollar cycle doesn't happen overnight. It's not the flip of a switch. And we could see it happening all the way back to February 24th and 25th of 2021. You had FedWire, you had the bad US Treasury auction, and then you had some pessimism, risk aversion. You had that episode of reflation, rising interest rates and the steepening yield curve and treasuries, as well as other markets around the world. Those seem to end, not, some of them ended in February, some of them transitioned in March. And then, so you had this sort of, rolling transition, a rolling inflection, a rolling over of many financial indications, as well as economic indications right in that window where as you pointed out, Emil, by the time you get to May, you have more and more capitulations, essentially, whether it's, it wasn't a single event, and whether, depending on the specific indication, by the end of May, especially into early June, what you saw was really the start of the downward slope, where it's become pretty much a hard, durable trend and pattern.
Poetry is about patterns, about beautiful synchronicity, like with Eurodollar number 5 being the number 5 and May being the 5th month. Another example of that sort of beautiful synchronicity might be that we're discussing the NBER on the day that it was announced that the United States had a negative GDP result. And I'm thinking back to our David Parkins illustration, because the last time we talked about the NBER, we were discussing how they were announcing that the recession was over. And David illustrated how the NBER was jumping out of the frying pan of recession into the fire of depression. Jeff, the results that have come in, I know this is just on the fly, you haven't written anything, but we're talking about the NBER. They're the ones responsible for dating recessions. We've got a negative quarter here. According to this financial website, I'm told that it was caused by a record trade deficit, softer inventory growth, a drop in government spending, and that personal consumption and non-residential fixed investment remains strong.
Strong.
So I can already
Did they
hear
actually say
the,
strong?
yeah, I can already hear people saying,
Look, as far as
ignore those things
yeah,
and focus on the good.
they're always going
Nothing
to
to worry
downplay
about.
this. And look, this doesn't necessarily mean the start of a new recession. And there's a discussion, the what discussion that we had last time, and one of the reasons why I had so much trouble dating Eurodollar number 5 was it was whether or not it was premature. In other words, was there ever a reflation number 4? As we talked about
Mm-hmm.
many times, and one of the things you always point out, Emil, the reflationary period between the 2020 recession and in between to today never really took off all that much. I know it did consumer prices. I know it did in certain gross domestic product numbers and things like that. But in financial markets, there was never any sort of even modicum of conviction that this was going to stick around, that it was anything other than a transitory period engineered by governments along with a supply shock. So there was always that trouble. You know, the NBER said the recession in 2020 was very short and that it ended, and that any new recession or any recession from that point on would be a new one. When we were saying, well, no, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just that we never left the last recession. So regardless of the NBER, regardless of our own dating committee, regardless of what anybody says about the negative GDP in the United States, what we're saying is that there's a Eurodollar number 5, which is contributing to very serious economic weakness. Whether that means we're actually in a recession or not, I don't think so just yet. But I think we're seeing the weaknesses that are consistent with the idea of Eurodollar number 5. And from what I've seen of the GDP report this morning, the key number in all of it is actually real final sales, which takes out inventory, takes out the export-import component, and says, what is it that U.S. Purchaser or U.S. buyers of all kinds, consumers and businesses, how much did they actually buy in real terms? And the answer is less than they did in the last quarter. And part of the reason for it was because we're all paying more because of the supply shock to get less. And that is the key takeaway from the GDP report, as well as Eurodollar number 5. In one respect, Eurodollar number 5 is the monetary answer to a supply shock itself. And so it's all consistent in this one package, which the final real key nail in the coffin, in my opinion, was the Chinese currency, Chinese yuan, which, as I think most people are aware of, even more than the Japanese yen, the Chinese yuan is suddenly crashing.
Jeff, do you want to talk about the Chinese currency some more?
I think we can
If so,
save
let's do
that
it in
for
an,
another episode where we can
yeah,
do it more
let's do
justice. I
that.
just wanted to mention,
Let's do it next.
just mention that the final nail in the coffin for me, because one of the indications that wasn't playing along with Eurodollar number 5 was CNY. CNY, especially from it had that same sort of dent in the currency chart going back to May. So there was that bump or blip in the road in May. But then for the rest of 2021 into 2022, it wasn't unusually strong, but it was rising. And I think that was more consistent or more a product of the merchandise trade surplus. But then you get to February 28th, that same day that shows
Let's talk about it in the next show.
Okay.
Next show, Jeff. Save it. Cliffhanger. Cliffhanger. Otherwise, no one's going to come for the next show and we won't get paid. What? We're doing this for free? All right. Thanks, Jeff.